What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Crew 2, and in this video I'm going to go over my top 6 street vehicles I would recommend everybody to take a look at. I feel like some of these are going to probably be the quote-unquote meta vehicles, and also some underrated cars in there as well, guys. So there's obviously going to be a lot of street vehicles in the game, including motorcycles, which I would say is probably going to be one of those vehicle classes that many players are most likely not going to use because you really cannot run the motorcycles against the street cars. And my goodness, there's so many street vehicles in the game, guys, that I really do feel like are forgotten. And most players are probably never going to use these again, which I honestly can't be mad about. Most of the vehicles on the game are probably not going to be the greatest option for racing. But anyway, jumping right into my top 6 vehicles in the street class here, starting off with number 6 is probably going to be a bit of a surprise, but then again, I normally run this car a good amount on the summits. It's going to be the Infiniti Q60, so I would say this car is going to be insanely unique. Not only does this thing honestly look really dang good, it's also going to be one of those vehicles I really never see anybody run. I would say this is pretty interesting due to the fact that some of these cars are going to be insanely good in the Crew 2, but most players are probably not going to run them because there is going to be better options. I really do think the Infiniti is actually a really good overall vehicle. Now, one thing this car is going to have a flaw with is going to be that top speed, which for this car, guys, it is going to do around 240 miles per hour, which is definitely not going to be the quickest. Also, it's not going to be the slowest like the S1 Celine as well, so at least it's going to be decently quick. But one of my favorite things about this car is by far going to be its handling. I feel like the stability and handling of the Infiniti is by far going to be better than many of the other street cars, and I feel like this vehicle is going to give you lots of confidence, especially around corners. One thing I was noticing with this vehicle is the fact that when you guys would actually speed up and fly around a corner, the car would not lose itself and or start to slide, or it wouldn't understeer or oversteer and stuff like that and basically make you lose your mind with it. That's probably going to be one of the reasons why many of the cars in the Crew 2 are basically forgotten. I might even go as far as saying that the Infiniti Q60 is probably going to be on the underrated side. The main reason, guys, I really never see anybody run this car. When I do use this thing in a summit, I'm definitely feeling kind of unique and or special in some way because I never see anybody run this. Now, do keep in mind it's not going to be like the fastest car out there, and you probably won't be able to beat like the Countach. But when it comes to doing the summit events and stuff like that, I notice I can normally get a pretty decent score with this car regardless of the race that's out. Even if it's going to be one of those bigger ones where the lower top speed on this vehicle might actually be a slight issue. But overall, guys, I really do feel like the Infiniti Q60 is going to be an insanely good vehicle to use overall. Like, I really do like to use this car, and I feel like a lot of players would also enjoy this thing if they did give it a try. I really do think the handling and stability on this thing is probably going to be some of the best in the game. Now, sure, as I did mention, it's not going to be the fastest car out there, but I really do feel like the handling and stability is really going to make up for that on a majority of the summit events. And now moving over to number 5 on the list is going to be the Porsche 911 Carrera 4S 992. Not only is this thing going to be really good looking because I love the way a 911 looks, I also would say this car is going to be on the underrated side as well compared to many of the other street cars. It's kind of insane, guys, because I literally never see anybody use the 4S, and I feel like this car is going to be insanely good. So not only is it going to be fast, doing around 259 to 260 miles per hour, which is going to put it right around some of the better street cars in the game like the SupperLeggera and or the Countach. I would definitely say the 4S here is going to be a really good option on most of the events. This car is definitely going to be considered one of the most underrated cars in the entire game, mainly because I really never see anybody run this thing. And I'm not gonna lie, guys, I've basically been picking this vehicle over the Infiniti quite often. I'm not saying the Infiniti is terrible in any way, but I just really like the way this 4S drives. And even compared to many of the other street cars on most of these no restriction races in these summits, I'm actually scoring very good with this vehicle as well, like getting close by to what the Countach and or SupperLeggera can get. I think that's going to come down to the way this car is going to handle because my goodness, the handling and stability on the Porsche here is going to be incredible, which is kind of funny considering most of the Porsches in real life are also absolutely insane. I really do feel like the 4S is going to mirror that pretty dang good. And when you guys are flying around a corner with this vehicle, you're going to notice how nicely it grips. It doesn't slide or struggle or anything like that. I would say the biggest challenge with the 4S is most likely going to be that 8-speed transmission, at least if you are running manual. I do find myself to shift pretty messed up sometimes with this vehicle, but most of that's going to come when you're first starting off because you might be redlining knowing you do need to shift it, and then you will have to be able to find the better gears when going around corners. But once you guys get past that, I would definitely say this car is going to be one of the best. And I really do think the Porsche 911 Carrera 4S, which also somehow sounded like a song right there, but overall guys, I really do think the Porsche 911 Carrera 4S is going to be a very viable option for basically every single race in the game. This thing has a great top speed, some of the best handling and stability I would say in the entire street class, and one of the best parts is you really never see anybody run this vehicle, which I think a lot of players would probably enjoy something different besides some of the quote-unquote meta vehicles. And now moving over to number 4 on the list is going to be the Porsche 911 GT. I would actually say many players are most likely running this car even to this day, guys, because of how good it actually is. Now, one thing I do want to mention though is I wouldn't say this list is going to be in like an order. It's more of like my favorite top 6 vehicles for that matter, but one of the biggest things about the Porsche 911, guys, is probably going to be its top speed. Now, I would say the top speed of this vehicle is probably going to be one of its biggest flaws, even though this is still going to be one of the best street cars in the game, guys. So this car is only going to hit 247 miles per hour, and or at least around that for that matter. I would say this car is still going to be insanely good, even though it's going to be more like on par with something like the Infiniti Q60 in that aspect of their top speed, considering most of the other vehicles on this list can do well over 255. I wouldn't say this car is going to be insanely bad or anything because it can't do like an extra 8 miles per hour, but to be honest, I really would say the GT here is probably going to be one of the best street cars, especially when it comes down to these shorter tracks with the way it does handle. I was seeing a lot of the leaderboards on some of these shorter tracks in the game basically being overrun by this vehicle. Like, this thing is going to be that good around some of these shorter tracks, and of course on some of the longer races in the game you're probably not going to have the best luck, mainly because you're going to be slower regardless of how good you are at driving with this vehicle. Some of the other street cars are going to be able to pass you by like 15 miles per hour, which I would say, depending on the event, could actually help tremendously in your time. But for this vehicle though, I would say one of the biggest positives with it is by far going to be the way it handles, so at least it does have that going for it. And once again guys, even with some of these vehicles having a lower top speed, I would say something even like the 911 GT here is still going to be insanely good on most of the summits. And now moving over to number 3 on the list, I think is going to be a car many players should try out. It's going to be the Lamborghini Huracan LP 610-4. It's funny because there's a lot of Lamborghinis in the game that are going to be really good. Not going to mention any names here, but there's also going to be some other pretty decent ones as well that I really don't see a lot of players run. This one, guys, is going to be the Huracan here, so this is one of my favorite street cars to use as well. I feel like a lot of players would really enjoy this thing. I've been trying out this vehicle a little bit more right behind the Porsche 911, which is going to be the Carrera 4S for that matter, not the GT, which is also going to be on this list as well. But the Lamborghini here, guys, is going to be a really fun and or fast car to use. The top speed on this vehicle is going to hit a crazy 260 plus miles per hour as well, basically putting it in the exact same category as the Porsche and some of the better Lamborghinis as well in the game. So this thing's definitely going to be something to look at. One of my favorite things about the Huracan is probably going to be the handling and or stability of this vehicle. I know a lot of people are wondering how some of these cars are going to compare to others, so I would say some cars are probably going to be a better option in certain aspects. Like, for example, guys, I would say the Lamborghini and or the Porsche 911 Carrera 4S are going to be insanely similar with the way they handle. At least that's something I have noticed, and I would be happy to pick either one of these vehicles in basically any summit. What's kind of interesting is I really never see anybody run the Huracan, even though this car is pretty dang good. I mean, for one, it's going to do 260 miles per hour, and it really doesn't struggle to get there in any way possible, especially with a nitrochemist set. Which is kind of funny because when I first drove this car and I was managing to get it to 260, I was like, wait a second, the Lamborghini Huracan's actually that quick? I really never expected some of these other street cars to be as good as they actually are. I really do feel like the Huracan's probably going to be like basically top 5 in the entire game. I feel like a lot of players could easily get around like the score of a Countach and or a SupperLeggera. Running this vehicle, not only guys is it going to have a great top speed, but the handling and stability around corners with this car is honestly going to be pretty incredible. I really do find it fun the way this car can actually grip, and you can basically feel the car grip around corners. It's really going to make these races a lot more fun as well. So this vehicle really is going to be considered slightly underrated, even though it's also going to be insanely good. And now moving over to number 2 on the list, I would say is probably not going to be very shocking to most of the players. That's going to be the Lamborghini Gallardo LP 574 Superleggera. Now one thing I do have to admit guys, I really haven't been using this vehicle all that much recently. I would say this is still going to be considered one of the meta type of vehicles, even though the Countach is going to be insanely good in this game for that matter, but I really do feel like I don't need to use the Superleggera anymore because I have the Porsche and or the Lamborghini Huracan, which I would say can directly compete with this vehicle in basically every way. Now I'm not saying the Superleggera is going to be bad because before the Countach came out, this was probably the most used vehicle in the street class, which is kind of insane considering there's over 220 vehicles in the game for that matter. The Superleggera guys will do around 261 miles per hour, which is going to make it insanely fast. I feel like that was one of the biggest reasons why so many people probably ran this car back in the day, because it's still going to be considered that good with a 260 mile per hour top speed. Not only that though, you're also going to be able to throw in insanely good handling and stability, making it one of the most sought after cars in the game. And I actually made a video a long time ago on this car, probably like close to a year and a half ago, saying this was like the best overall street car in the game back then. I would say that's probably going to be a bit different now with the Countach being out, but the Superleggera can still easily be used in basically every single summit, even with some of the other street cars now becoming insanely good like the Countach and or even the Lamborghini Huracan. At least that car is to me anyway. I would still say the Superleggera is going to be a very great option for basically racing in general, and if you guys were trying to get a high score on a summit, I do think the Superleggera is still going to be a very good option. It's really hard to beat a really high top speed with insanely good handling and or stability. And now moving over to number 1 on the list, I would say is not going to be very shocking to most players as well. It's going to be the Lamborghini Countach LP 5000. This thing is honestly absolutely incredible. Funnily enough, I really haven't been running this car all that much recently because I really don't want to use these vehicles on summits. Now I'm not saying they're going to be like really bad or anything like that, or I hate this car or something like that, because I really do love the look of Countaches in real life. It's probably going to be one of my favorite body styles on Lamborghinis in general. I just really haven't used this vehicle that much when it comes to summits because I have been noticing most of the leaderboards are obviously going to be covered in this vehicle, and that's probably going to be for good reasoning. I mean, the Countach is honestly pretty dang incredible with the way it does handle. It's also going to be insanely fast, and what's kind of interesting is it is going to be a 5-speed as well, so I really wasn't expecting this car to be all that great. And my goodness, this car basically took over the street class pretty much the day that it came out. I barely see anyone run the Superleggera or basically any other street car now, which really wasn't all that shocking to me considering the top speed of the Countach is going to be around 260 miles per hour, basically being almost identical to the Superleggera. And what's very interesting, as I did mention before, is the fact this vehicle is going to be a 5-speed, so if you guys are in manual, this thing is still going to remain insanely quick for that matter, which is pretty surprising. Normally the 5 speeds are going to be on the slower side, like something like the Ariel Atom, which that car is still going to remain one of my favorites as well in the street class, but I didn't want to include it in this list mainly because of the way that car was. I feel like a lot of players are probably not going to use it, but my goodness guys, the Lamborghini Countach is probably still going to remain on top in the street class for a long time. I have a feeling that's not going to change for a while. Now the main reason why I don't use this vehicle is because I was wanting to basically test out other cars in this class to see what they can do and how they're going to compare to different vehicles like the Countach and or the SupperLeggera, and to see if they can actually be used against these in summits and stuff. And from the testing I have done so far, I would say you could probably score very close to these cars, even though most of the leaderboards in the summits, if it is a no restriction, is by far going to be covered in the Countach here, which I have a feeling that's most likely not going to change in the future unless something else releases that's as good as this vehicle, which I do think a lot of players might be happy about in some way though, because now they're not going to be using the SupperLeggera, so it's going to be a nice change of pace by running the Countach. But overall guys, I feel like every vehicle on this list is by far going to be worth a look. The main reason why I included the Countach and or the SupperLeggera is mainly because you really cannot include them. These cars are going to be that good in this class and basically like the go-to for most players, but I also feel like some of the underrated vehicles and or something like the Lamborghini Huracan or the beloved Porsche 911 Carrera 4S are going to be great vehicles. Especially when looking at some of the leaderboards and stuff in the summits, I'm sure you're probably going to notice the Countach basically taking it over for a while, but at least you can run something like the Huracan and or the 911 Carrera 4S and still score pretty similar to it and or get a decent enough score to still be in platinum and stuff like that. That way you don't actually have to run the Countach. But let me know what you guys think about these vehicles in the comments below and which street car is going to be your overall favorite and why. And here are the settings I'm currently running on all 6 of these cars.